It's 1948. Close your eyes and try to remember a kitchen you've never actually stood in. Something low and slow on the stove since before sunrise. A cast iron skillet doing its quiet work. The particular weight of air in a room where someone has been cooking for hours, not minutes. That kitchen is gone. Not because the recipes vanished or the ingredients disappeared. Because someone decided the woman at that stove needed liberating and sold her that liberation in a cardboard box for 99 cents. What we lost wasn't convenience. It was the belief that Sunday was worth protecting. This is what she made. This is what they took. Number 50. Sunday pot roast with root vegetables the week built toward Sunday. In Midwest farmhouses from the 1930s through the 1950s, a 12-cent chuck roast went into the oven before church with carrots, cellar potatoes, an onion, and water under a sealed lid. 4 hours later, the collagen had broken down completely. The same process restaurants now charge $40 to replicate, calling it braising. Grandma called it Sunday dinner. The steam rising when she lifted that lid wasn't the smell of scarcity. It was the smell of a woman who knew exactly what she was doing, every single week, without fail. Number 49. Chicken and dumplings and 18-cent hen, simmered whole for 2 hours in Appalachian and Southern kitchens, became a broth that turned gold, then amber. Flour and buttermilk dumplings dropped in by the spoonful steamed inside that broth, instead of being baked or fried, soaking up flavor no package could ever replicate. Today restaurants charge $22 a bowl, calling it rustic comfort food, with Farmhouse chalked onto a salvaged barn door. They understand the nostalgia. They have no idea what they're actually selling, or what it cost to make it the first time. Number 48. Sunday ham with red-eye gravy Sunday mornings in the Appalachian South began before sunrise, with an 8-cent ham steak already in the skillet. The gravy was free. Pan drippings plus a quarter cup of black coffee, whose acidity chemically breaks down cured pork proteins into something sharp and silky. Food scientists confirmed this in 1987. Grandmother had been doing it for 40 years already. The gravy went over the ham beside the biscuits soaking up everything left on the plate. Nothing wasted, nothing unaccounted for, in a tradition documented since the 1840s. Number 47. Dried bean soup. 2 pounds of dried navy beans cost 5 cents in 1933 and fed a family of 6 for 2 days, with pot liquor left for morning. Soaked overnight, simmered with a ham bone or just salt, pepper, and bay leaf, those beans delivered more protein per ounce than chicken, more potassium than a banana. On the Great Plains and in the Ozark Hollows, Grandmother didn't know the nutrition numbers. She knew her children sat down hungry and stood up full for almost nothing. This wasn't poverty food. This was engineering disguised as Sunday dinner. Number 46. Scalloped potatoes with salt pork 15 cents bought 10 pounds of potatoes in 1934. Salt pork ran 4 cents a pound. Across the upper Midwest and New England, thin potato layers went into cast iron, with rendered salt pork between them and milk poured to the top, baking 90 minutes until golden and thick. Today it's called gratin dauphinois, $14 a side in a white ramekin. The French name is prettier. The result is identical, except the brasserie doesn't have to admit it was invented by farm women who couldn't afford butter. Number 45. Sunday bread pudding. 3-day-old bread wasn't a problem. It was the ingredient. Soaked in sweetened egg custard and baked until set, a national Sunday dish since colonial times. In 1930, Wonder Bread's maker ran ads claiming day-old bread harbored bacteria, urging women to buy fresh daily. It was false and wildly profitable, destroying the centuries-old stale bread economy that had also produced stuffing and bread soup. That manufactured fear didn't improve anything. It manufactured a problem only their product could solve, the cost of a tradition that wasted nothing. Number 44. Fried cornmeal mush cornmeal cost 3 cents a pound in 1933, making a batch of mush for less than a penny. Appalachian and rural southern Sundays often began with porridge cooked the night before, set overnight in the root cellar, sliced thick, and fried golden in cast iron. Crusted outside, creamy inside. Served with sorghum or whatever preserves were open, it cost almost nothing in January when the garden was months away. Today it's called polenta, imported from Italian mills, $15 a plate. Grandmother just called it mush, ground at the local mill, number 43. Sunday chicken pie won 22-cent birds stretched to feed 9 people across the Mid-Atlantic and New England. No explanation needed. Every scrap of meat was pulled from every bone, the broth thickened with flour, root cellar vegetables added, and biscuit dough laid on top instead of pastry crust. Faster, and able to absorb the broth as it baked. 100 regional names, one purpose. Nobody left hungry, nobody left wanting. A woman who could make one chicken satisfy 9 people without anyone feeling shortchanged wasn't a short-order cook. She was an architect of Sunday, number 42. Pickled beets from the root cellar put up in August, ready by October, lasting through summer if needed. Pennsylvania Dutch and Midwestern grandmothers boiled garden beets tender, packed them with vinegar, sugar, cloves, and cinnamon, and sealed them in the root cellar. Unknowingly, they were practicing lactofermentation, now praised by functional medicine for gut health. University of Wisconsin researchers confirmed the microbiological benefits in 2009. Grandmother just called it putting up the beets, every August without fail, for generations before anyone needed a study to tell her she was right. Number 41. Deviled eggs. A dozen eggs cost 18 cents in 1935, paired with homemade mayonnaise whisked by hand from oil, raw yolk, and vinegar. Hard-boiled, halved, mashed with mustard, and dusted with paprika, deviled eggs said Sunday on tables nationwide by the 1930s. Farm and city, immigrant and native-born alike. In the 1950s, Hellmann's and Best Foods repositioned them as sophisticated party food rather than everyday fare. An entire generation packed the egg plate away for birthdays only. The ordinary Sunday deviled egg never fully recovered from that rebranding. Number 40. Sunday buttermilk biscuits 5 cents made a full batch every Sunday from age 8 at her mother's hip onward. The chemistry, lactic acid in buttermilk reacting with baking soda, lifted a biscuit from flat to layered, all known purely by feel, cold fat, minimal handling, hot oven. In 1952, Pillsbury introduced canned refrigerated dough. By 1960, Southern flour sales had measurably declined. The can was faster, but produced a biscuit-shaped object, uniform and incapable of carrying a Sunday morning. That layered, hand-pulled biscuit has never been in a can, and never will be. In 1953, Swanson introduced the TV dinner, advertising a relaxed family with no one tired, no flour on anyone's hands, implying the Sunday cook's 4 hours were unnecessary. Campbell's and General Mills ran parallel campaigns positioning canned soup, and Betty Crocker as liberation from the kitchen, even printing homemade on products containing no home at all. This wasn't solving a problem women had. It was inventing one because their products had no other reason to exist. Over 20 years and hundreds of millions of dollars, the story won, not because the food was better, but because the campaign never stopped. Number 39. Slow-cooked pinto beans with ham bone-free ham bone from 2 weeks prior, wrapped and saved because nothing with anything left to give was ever thrown away. In the Ozarks, the Texas Hill Country, and the rural South, pinto simmered 8 hours with that bone, an onion, and pepper until gelatin dispersed through the liquid and the beans needed nothing else. 3 cents a pound in 1935, feeding 6 people for 2 days. The dish carried families through Monday and Tuesday at no extra cost. Proof that the cheapest ingredients, handled with patience, outperformed anything bought. Number 38. Appalachian stack cake. This recipe had no price because it had neighbors instead. Mountain South weddings from the 1880s through the 1940s ran on a cake where each guest brought one thin ginger-spiced layer. Stacked at the celebration and filled with dried apple preserves, more guests meant a taller cake. Distributed cost, shared result, nobody overburdened or excluded. What was actually expensive couldn't be purchased. Trust, coordination, the understanding that no family mattered more than the table itself. It was a community food system disguised as dessert, decades ahead of anything we now call mutual aid. Number 37. Cream chipped beef on toast. A 10-cent jar of dried beef, flour, butter, milk, and toast from yesterday's loaf crossed two worlds, Midwestern farmhouse Sundays and military mess halls from World War I through Korea. Soldiers came home still craving it, and their wives learned to make it, carrying it back into civilian kitchens for a generation. Thick, peppery white gravy over dried beef on absorbent toast was fast, filling, and shelf-stable through impassable winter roads. Nobody renamed it or rebranded it for nostalgia. People simply stopped making it. Maybe the most honest disappearance on this entire list. Number 36. Sunday sauerkraut and pork 1-cent cabbage, fermented 3 weeks in a crock, sustained German immigrant communities across Pennsylvania, Ohio, Indiana, and Wisconsin through winters lasting half the year. Pork shoulder braised low in that sauerkraut's own brine, tenderized from outside and inside at once, the kraut mellowing as it gave up acidity into the pot. Dismissed for generations as peasant food, it was actually a 500-year-old preservation and nutrition system, the lactobacillus producing B vitamins and seeding gut bacteria, unlike the pasteurized supermarket version that replaced it by 1960. The dismissal, not the dish, was the actual mistake. Number 35. Molasses baked beans, the oldest dish on this list, with documented New England recipes from the 1600s, beans buried in a pot beside the fire on Saturday, pulled out Sunday morning. Dried navy beans, salt pork, molasses, mustard, and onion, baked 8 hours. In 1895, Campbell's began selling canned pork and beans, cheaper, advertised relentlessly, nowhere near equivalent. By 1955, most households had never made baked beans from scratch. 300 years of knowledge erased in 2 generations, not because the can was better, but because it was everywhere, every week, at a price that made real labor seem unjustifiable. Number 34. Fried salt pork with cream gravy, 5 cents a pound. Salt pork anchored protein in millions of Appalachian and Ozark farmhouse kitchens, kept indefinitely in a crock for whenever fresh meat wasn't available. Sliced, desalted, dredged in cornmeal, and fried dark and crisp, it left drippings for a wrist-stirred flour and milk gravy, white, thick, peppery, poured over everything on the plate. This was the Sunday upgrade. Not extravagance, but elevation through technique on a 5-cent ingredient, treated with enough care to arrive at the table with real dignity. That, in 4 sentences, is the entire philosophy of farmhouse Sunday cooking. Number 33. Sunday vegetable soup from bone brotha, free or 2-cent soup bone, simmered 2 hours, released collagen, gelatin, marrow fat, calcium, and trace minerals, skimmed patiently, then loaded with whatever root cellar vegetables were available. The modern bone broth wellness industry now sells $12 jars of this exact preparation as a superfood discovery. The only discovery is that grandmother was right decades before anyone studied it. That knowledge was abandoned when bouillon cubes arrived in the 1940s, teaching a generation that salt and hydrogenated fat in cube form was a reasonable substitute for a pot simmered all morning. It was never a substitute. Number 23. Hoe cakes with sorghum older than cornbread itself. Coarse cornmeal, water, and salt patted flat and cooked on dry cast iron, or, in the oldest version, a hoe blade over fire. 3-cent cornmeal and 10-cent sorghum syrup made a Sunday morning meal across Appalachia. and the Deep South requiring the fewest possible steps between hunger and food. Crisp outside, dense and grainy inside, with sorghum's bitterness cutting the corn fat's richness before a slower sweetness arrived. This was the sharecropper table's Sunday bread, not a lesser substitute for something better, but the genuine thing itself, complete on its own terms. Number 22. Sunday stewed tomatoes put up in July's overflow, ready in a jar by Sunday in November. Home-canned stewed tomatoes were Midwest and Mid-Atlantic pantry staples from the 1880s through the 1950s. On the table, they became vegetable and sauce both, poured over rice, spooned beside pork, or stretched into a quick soup when the afternoon ran long. The labeled jar shelf in the root cellar wasn't quaint decoration. It was a sophisticated food security system. Summer labor paying winter dividends, among the most rational food economics this country has ever practiced. It got replaced by a can of Hunt's and called Progress. Number 21. Rutabaga mashed with butter 3 cents a pound through the 1930s and 40s, rutabaga grew reliably in cold climates where little else did, brought to Minnesota, the Dakotas, and New England by Scandinavian and Northern European families. Boiled tender and mashed with butter and salt, its earthy bitterness, called rotmos in Swedish homes, neeps in Scottish and Irish ones, was the point, not a flaw. Instant mashed potato flakes arrived in the early 1960s, and the fresh root vegetable market collapsed within a decade. A whole generation grew up never tasting rutabaga. Their children haven't either. The vegetable survived. The knowledge of it didn't. Number 20. Sunday fried rabbit free, caught with a .22 rifle or a wire snare by a 12-year-old before breakfast. Across the Midwest, Appalachia, and the Great Plains, rabbit was prepared exactly like fried chicken. Buttermilk soaked, dredged in seasoned flour, fried golden in hot lard, leaner and slightly gamier, but treated with identical care. In the 1920s and 30s, it wasn't considered inferior to chicken, simply free protein from the field outside the door. Suburbanization in the 1950s removed that field, and with it the general competence of self-provisioning that has never really returned to American household life. Number 19. Potato soup with cream and chives 15 cents for 10 pounds of potatoes, a cup of cream, an onion, and window box chives kept alive through January by foresight planted in September. Irish-American families made potato soup a winter Sunday staple from the 1840s onward. Cheap, filling made from kitchen staples, and capable of feeding 10 people with leftovers for Monday. Today, a cold version called Vichyssoise runs $14 a bowl in Manhattan, made with pricier leeks instead of onions, and served chilled with a chive garnish. Grandmother served it hot and just called it potato soup. She was right. Number 18. Sunday applesauce cake root cellar applesauce, put up in August, anchored a cake costing under 8 cents that kept all week. Sunday dessert, Wednesday snack, Saturday breakfast. Applesauce replaced eggs at a 1 cup to 2 egg ratio, the apple pectin mimicking emulsified butter's texture, a Depression necessity discovery later refined into something better than what it substituted for. Warm cinnamon, nutmeg, allspice, and clove, maybe raisins, a simple glaze, or nothing at all. It came out dense and moist, tasting like fall itself, and the quiet intelligence of a woman who turned nothing into something every single week, without fanfare. Number 17. Crackling cornbread-free cracklings, rendered pork skin and connective tissue left after pressing lard. Folded into Deep South and Appalachian cornbread, their fat lubricating the crumb and their crunch providing contrast no commercial bakery can replicate. Nothing was discarded. Corn gave the meal, the hog gave fat and crackling, cast iron gave the crust, the oven gave 20 minutes. The result cost almost nothing, yet tasted like considerably more. The central alchemy of every recipe on this entire list, repeated in 100 different forms but never once actually expensive to produce. Number 16. Sunday oyster stew 10 cents for a dozen oysters along the Chesapeake in 1935. Working-class waterman food, warmed gently in its own liquor with cream and butter, never boiled, which toughens oysters and breaks cream. Through the late 1800s, urban restaurant associations and seafood distributors deliberately restricted supply to premium outlets, tripling prices by 1920. By 1950, the same dishwatermen's families ate twice weekly had become a special occasion luxury for those same families. The oyster never changed. The pricing system around it was rebuilt, on purpose, to turn a staple into status. By 1965, General Mills, Pillsbury, and Campbell's had collectively spent over $400 million $1965 advertising against the Sunday meal. The message was always identical. Grandmother's kitchen was hard, theirs was easy. Hers took all day, theirs took 30 minutes. They never claimed the food was better. They didn't need to. They needed her to feel her own competence as a burden she deserved to escape. She didn't feel that way before the spending started. After 20 years and $400 million, enough of her daughters did. The Sunday kitchen didn't die from difficulty. It was marketed to death on purpose for a market to exist. Number 15. Glazed carrots with brown sugar 3-cent carrots, or free from the garden, went into a skillet with butter, brown sugar, salt, and a little water, steamed covered, then reduced uncovered until lacquered in sweet caramelized glaze. Almost nothing in cost, tasting like everything, this Sunday vegetable arrived at the table dressed for the occasion. They were typically eaten first, before anything else was touched. Not the plan, but always the result. No meal that begins with people reaching first for the vegetable dish has actually failed at anything it was trying to do. Number 14. Sunday vinegar Pinot citrus available in an Appalachian winter, yet the pie still got made. Eggs, sugar, butter, flour, water, and 2 tablespoons of apple cider vinegar baked into a custard, delivering a lemon pie's brightness without a single lemon. Not an imitation, a solution born of understanding that acidity, not citrus specifically, was the actual flavor needed. Appearing on Kentucky, Tennessee, and Ozark Sunday tables from the late 1800s through the 1940s, it survives in no commercial bakery today because a 5-cent pie requiring no special ingredient isn't a product. It's knowledge, and knowledge carries no profit margin. Number 13. Smothered pork chops with onion gravy 6 cents apiece for thin pork chops, browned hard in cast iron, then set aside while 3 root-cellar onions cooked low into sweetness in the drippings. Flour made a roux, broth made gravy, and the chops returned to simmer an hour under a lid while collagen relaxed and pork absorbed everything around it. A technique from African-American kitchens across Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, and Louisiana. It transformed the cheapest cut in the case into something genuinely extraordinary. 6 cents of meat went in. What came out an hour later was unmistakably Sunday. Number 12. Fried corn 5 cents for a dozen ears at summer's peak, or free if grown at home. Fried corn means cutting kernels fresh, then scraping the cob for its starchy corn milk, which most recipes ignore entirely. Cooked in bacon drippings with salt and pepper, the starch thickens and the sugars caramelize against hot cast iron until the dish turns dense, creamy, and crusted at the edges. It tastes nothing like canned or frozen corn. It tastes like what corn actually is, a vegetable of real complexity the processing industry spent 70 years reducing to flavorless filler. Number 11. Sunday custard pie under 6 cents total. Eggs, milk, sugar, vanilla, nutmeg, a plain crust. Custard pie has appeared on American Sunday tables since the colonial period, with timing and temperature known by feel rather than written instruction, passed hand to hand for generations. Today it's creme brulee, torched theatrically for $12 a ramekin. The egg is the same egg, the cream the same cream, the vanilla the same vanilla. The torch exists only because the modern version needs theater to justify its price. The Farmhouse original never needed theater. It already had Sunday. Number 10. Baked sweet potatoes with sorghum butter 2 cents each across the rural South and Appalachia. Sweet potatoes went into the oven plain, the natural sugars caramelizing under the skin over an hour. Sorghum butter. Softened butter worked with sorghum syrup until neither flavor stood alone, was richer than the syrup, deeper than the butter, bitter first and sweet after. Beta-carotene, potassium, manganese, B6, and a lower glycemic response than a white potato, confirmed in metabolic studies as recent as 2022. Grandmother chose sweet potatoes over white ones whenever she had a choice, for reasons she felt rather than measured. She was right. Number 9. Sunday meatloaf with oat filler 12 cents a pound for ground beef, 2 cents of oats, an egg, an onion, a smear of tomato on top. The oat, soaked in milk, folded through the meat, wasn't a flaw or a cheap filler. It stretched protein further, absorbed fat, and kept the loaf moist in a way plain beef alone never managed. In the 1950s and 60s, as beef grew cheap, boxed meatloaf mix manufacturers repositioned that same oat logic as a dehydrated onion seasoning packet costing 3 times as much. The meatloaf got drier. Nobody could explain why. Nobody mentioned the oats. Number 8. Dried apple stack pie apples, dried on the roof through September, condensed into leather brown sweetness by November. Appalachian stack pie layered thin pastry with cooked dried apple filling. No refrigeration required, improving over 3 days as the filling softened each layer further, becoming denser and more unified with age. Carried to church in a covered basket and shared after services, a pie that kept 3 days was a pie that could feed 2 tables instead of 1. The recipe was built for sharing twice, in a tradition where the sharing mattered as much as the eating itself. Number 7. Sunday succotash before it became a cartoon punchline. Succotash carried real weight. Lima beans and corn cooked together, rooted in Narragansett and Wampanoag cooking, present on American tables for 3 centuries. Together the bean and the corn form a complete protein pairing. The same logic behind the Three Sisters planting tradition, where companion crops fed each other in the soil, the way the people eating them fed each other at the table. The dish vanished within a decade of frozen vegetables arriving separately bagged in the 1950s. Not because frozen was better, but because it broke apart a pairing built on planning ahead. Number 6. Souse, head cheese, made from the head, feet, and ears, the parts requiring the most work and yielding in skilled hands, something refined over 500 years across 2 continents. Simmered for hours until the meat fell from bone and the broth turned thick with natural gelatin, picked clean, seasoned aggressively with vinegar and pepper, packed into a mold, and set overnight in the root cellar into a sliceable cold loaf. It cost nothing, made from what industrial meat processing in the 1950s removed from the retail supply chain entirely. When the parts disappeared from the butcher case, the knowledge of what to do with them disappeared within 1 generation. Number 5. Sunday brown gravy over everything free pan drippings, 1 cent flour, tap water, and a wrist that knew exactly how much of each. Brown gravy wasn't a recipe. It was a skill, reading the pan, keeping the roux moving until it smelled right, adding liquid slowly enough to avoid lumps, seasoning only by taste. It was Sunday's connective tissue, unifying the roast, the potatoes, and the biscuit into one meal. In 1949, Pillsbury introduced the first gravy mix packet, cornstarch, MSG, caramel coloring, producing something that looked like gravy the way a photograph of fire looks like heat. By 1965, packet sales hit $60 million, and the wrist skill it replaced began leaving the culture for good. Number 4. Crackers and milk. This isn't a recipe. In the hardest Depression years, across Appalachian coal camps and drought-blasted plains homesteads, some Sundays the pot was empty and the flour sack was light. The meal was crackers broken into cold milk, 3-cent saltines, free milk from the family cow, providing calories, a set table, and the same Sunday places observed every week regardless of what filled the bowl. This wasn't failure. It was endurance. The ritual held when the food couldn't, because the ritual was never really about the food. It was about deciding, every single week, that the family and the table were both still worth keeping. Number 3. Sunday chicken fried steak with white gravy, 9 cents a pound for round steak, the cheapest and toughest cut in the case, pounded until the fibers broke down and the meat went thin and tender. Dredged in flour, dipped in egg, dredged again, fried in hot lard until the crust ran deep brown and shatteringly crisp around meat cooked just through. White gravy, milk, flour, pepper, salt went over it, not beside it. Texas, Oklahoma, and the whole Great Plains all claim this dish, and all of them are right, because it belongs to anyone whose grandmother turned 9 cents of the worst cut into the best thing on the table through nothing but skill, time, and refusal to serve less than her best. Number 2. Slow-cooked greens with pot liquor garden collards cost nothing. 4-cent fatbacks simmered them down for 2 hours into something silk-textured, the liquid beneath turning darker than broth. Tuskegee University researchers documented in the 1940s that this liquid held nearly every water-soluble vitamin the greens released. Iron, calcium, folate, vitamin C, typically poured down the drain by cooks who didn't know better. The ones who sopped it with cornbread instead were feeding their families better than anyone around them understood. Processing convenience vegetables destroys 40 to 80% of that same vitamin content. Every vitamin in that pot liquor is one a frozen bag throws straight away. Number 1. The Sunday Table No recipe. No price. No single decade or region, because this happened everywhere the same way, every week. The good cloth came out of the drawer instead of the everyday oilcloth. Plates came down from the shelf, glasses got filled, chairs got pulled out, and then the food came, not from a package designed for someone else's profit, but from her garden, her root cellar, the beans soaked since Saturday night, the pot that had been on since morning. The table was an act of faith, that the people seated around it were worth the work, and that the work itself said something no other gesture could say. It was never just about the food. Closing this week, make the beans from scratch. Make the biscuits by hand. Put the cast iron skillet back on the stove where it belongs. The women who fed families of 8 on 4 cents of dried beans and a ham bone weren't cooking out of desperation. They were practicing a form of love that needed no separate word for itself, building a table that held families together through drought, depression, and war. They were right about the nutrition, the cost, and the value of a meal made from scratch by someone who knew exactly what they were doing, and they knew it before any laboratory or any corporation confirmed it for them. The food industry took the Sunday table from us on purpose because it needed us to forget that the work was worth doing. It was wrong. Comment below and tell me which one your grandmother made. Tell me the kitchen. Tell me what it smelled like when you walked through that door. That memory belongs to you, and it belongs here.